What Becker argues is that we wouldn't be able to get up in the morning if that's all we thought about. I'm going to die. I can walk outside and get hit by a meteor. I'm a breathing piece of defecating meat. We would just not be able to stand up. We'd be quivering blobs of biological protoplasm cowering under our beds, groping for large sedatives. And what Becker hypothesized.
Sorry, Sheldon. That's basically, you just described my life right now.
Me too. That's why when I read this book, I'm like, this is me.
In this episode, we talk with Sheldon Solomon, who's a psychologist and professor of social psychology at Skidmore College. Sheldon is the father of terror management theory, which is the study of the impact of unconscious death awareness and how this leads to anxiety and behavior modification in our daily lives. If you would like to support the show or know more about us, sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com or click on the button on screen. Now, buckle up for this fast-talking episode, How Death is Already Pulling Your Strings. And we just want to make a note that we apologize for the video quality on this call, but the sound is good.
Terror management theory is just our effort. When I say our, I mean myself and my buddies Jeff Greenberg and Tom Pazinski. And in 1980, we read a book by Ernest Becker called The Denial of Death. And it changed our lives, both as psychologists and as people, because basically what Becker says is that people are in many ways no different from any other forms of life, and that we're biologically constructed to stay alive in order to survive and to reproduce. On the other hand, we're quite different than all other living creatures, thanks in large measure to our ginormous forebrain, which gives us, among other things, the capacity to think abstractly and symbolically, to the point where we could literally imagine stuff that doesn't exist and then have the audacity to take our dreams and make them real. And of course, that is a tremendously adaptive set of cognitive capabilities. At the same time, what Becker points out is that we're so smart that we actually realize that we're here, which is both exciting. It's great to be alive and to know it. But it's also terrifying, because if you're alive and you know it, unless you're a baby or cognitively impaired, you also know that, like all living things, your life is of finite duration. In simpler terms, that you're going to die someday, and that you can die at any time for reasons that you can never control. And just to be annoying, Becker says we also don't like the fact that we're animals, breathing pieces of defecating meat that are no more significant or enduring than porcupines or pineapples. And what Becker argues is that we wouldn't be able to get up in the morning if that's all we thought about. I'm going to die. I can walk outside and get hit by a meteor. I'm a breathing piece of defecating meat. We would just not be able to stand up. We'd be quivering blobs of biological protoplasm cowering under our beds, groping for large sedatives. And what Becker hypothesized...
Sorry, Sheldon. That's basically, you just described my life right now.
Me too. That's why when I read this book, I'm like, this is me. So precisely, I'm reading this book. I'm like, oh man, this is the first guy who is explaining to me my sense of the world. And so then Becker goes on to say, and he uses these words, that we manage the existential terror that results from us being the only creatures who know from a rather early age that we're going to die someday. And we know this even when we're not in any immediate danger. And what he proposes is the way that we get by from day to day is to embrace what he called cultural worldviews. which he defines as beliefs that we share with our fellow human beings that give us a sense that life has meaning and that we have value. And the ultimate function of those beliefs is minimize anxiety, both in general and about death in particular, and also to give us a sense that we are qualified for some form of immortality, be it the literal immortality, the heavens, the afterlives, the souls and reincarnations that are central to all of the world's great religions. Although we may not believe that, but if we don't, that's not the only flavor of immortality. There's also what Robert J. Lifton called symbolic immortality. And this goes back to the ancient Greeks. You may realize that you're not going to be here forever, but you're really comforted by the fact that some vestige of yourself will persist over time nonetheless, maybe from having kids, maybe from amassing great fortunes, maybe from writing great books or doing a great podcast. And so what terror management theory does is to take all of these ideas from Becker. He wrote like 14 books, and we just wanted to reduce it to a few simple statements. And, you know, in a nutshell, basically, terror management theory says that the uniquely human awareness of death gives rise to potentially paralyzing existential terror that we manage by believing that we're valuable people in a meaningful universe and therefore qualified for immortality. And what the theory then goes on to hypothesize is that whether we're aware of it or not, and mostly we're not aware of it, we spend most of our lives trying desperately to maintain confidence in our cultural worldview, as well as faith that we're valuable participants in the cosmological drama to which we subscribe. And so that's basically what the theory says.
Awesome. I understood almost everything, which is a good sign, I think.
That is a good sign.
But the thing is, to me, after that, you know, you have a theory, and what is even more striking or incredible is that you've managed to prove this theory by doing hundreds and hundreds of studies, I believe. You know, you and other of your colleagues have done that, and you have proven that. And that's very fascinating. Would you be able to just to tell us a little bit about this experiment, just that proves and, well, or concludes that you are on the right track?
You know, so it's the early 1980s. We read these books. I thought they were just phenomenal. For one thing, I understood Becker's language. He went to great lengths to try to be very clear. I also thought it helped explain a lot of things that Tom and Jeff and I were interested in that just don't make any sense otherwise. And we can talk more about that, you know, in the course of our conversation. But we went all over the United States and Canada and Europe, Holland, Germany, UK. And, you know, we just said to psychologists and other folks, mostly professors, we're like, these are tremendous ideas. We think they're important. And what most people said is, we think this is stupid, or at least we think you're stupid. And they said two things. One is, well, I don't think about death that often. So obviously these ideas don't make any sense. And you know, we were young and annoying. And so we just said, well, okay, you don't think about death very often precisely because we're right. Because the reason you don't think about death that often is you're lucky enough to be comfortably embedded in a cultural worldview that provides you with a sense of meaning and value. All right, but that's like Freud saying, oh, you either agree with me about repression or you don't. And if you agree with me, I'm right. And if you don't, you're repressing. And I'm right. So am I right or am I right? So anyway, that did not endear us. Yeah, it was great. We had a lot of fun, but we didn't make any friends in the academy. And then the other thing that people said is, well, these ideas are indeed interesting, but they come from existential philosophy and they come from psychoanalysis. And these are highly speculative ideas for which there's no evidence And more importantly, it would be impossible to provide evidence. And here's where we come in. Jeff and Tom and we have our PhDs in experimental social psychology. So when people said, "Oh, you don't have any evidence," we're like, "Oh, fuck. Okay, you're right. But then again, we have PhDs in experimental psychology, so why don't we try to do that?" And as you've mentioned, we have conducted hundreds, and there's now well over 1,000 studies, not only by our people, but by other folks around the world. And I think they provide a compelling body of evidence that make it very difficult to argue against Becker's main claim, which is that death anxiety, largely unconscious, influences just about everything that people think about and what they do. So we were sitting around one day and we're like, "Oh man, how are we going to try and prove that Becker's right? How are we going to find evidence in support of his views?" And we were lucky. I always joke. I'm like, "Oh, we had an accident. A thought struck us." We were sitting around and we're like, "Okay, how about this? Why don't we remind some people about their own mortality, and let's remind other people about something unpleasant, but that's not fatal."
Like that.
You're going to the dentist and they have to yank a tooth, or you're in a car accident and they have to cut off one of your legs, or for university students, you failed an exam. All unpleasant, but not fatal. And then we said, well, okay, if Becker is right, then when you're reminded of your mortality, that should make you cling more tenaciously to your culturally constructed beliefs. And we should be able to detect that by measuring your reaction to other individuals who either share your beliefs or ones who are opposed to them or merely different. And what we predicted is that when you're reminded of death, you're going to like other people a lot more if they share your beliefs, and you're going to hate and harm people who are opposed to your beliefs or merely different. And so we remind people about that they're going to die in a number of different ways. So the first couple of years, we just had them come into the lab and fill out a bunch of personality questionnaires. And right in the middle would be a questionnaire where we just asked them to jot down their thoughts and feelings about their own mortality. At other times, we go out in the so-called real world, and we stop some people in front of a funeral home and other people 100 meters to either side. And our logic there is, well, all right, if you're in front of a funeral home, particularly we started in Germany where they have embalmed corpses in the window, well, that may make you think of death, even if you don't know that you are. And then finally, we have another paradigm where we bring people back in the lab and we have them read things on a computer screen. And while they're doing that, we flash the word death so fast for 28 milliseconds that you don't even know that you're being exposed to it. And it doesn't matter how we remind people that they're going to die. What we find consistently is that it has pronounced effects on their subsequent attitudes and behaviors. So, for example, the first study that we did was in Tucson, Arizona, with municipal court judges. And we had about 30 or 40 judges, and we randomly divided them into two groups. Some of the judges were reminded about their mortality and the others not. And then we asked them, we gave them a very typical court case in Arizona at the time. And these were women who were charged with prostitution. And the judge was asked to set a penalty. How much will the alleged prostitute have to pay to get out of jail? And what we found was astonishing, because the judges who were not reminded of their mortality, they set an average penalty of about $50. And that was the average penalty for that crime at the time. This is in the 1980s. However, the judges that were reminded that they were going to die first, they set a penalty that was 9 times higher, $455. And what is striking about that is that when we told the judges afterwards, when we said, hey, this is what we did, we asked you to think about death first because we wanted to see if it would influence your judgment in this case, all of them were vigorously in denial with regard to the possibility that could have had any effect on their judgment. They just said, we're judges. We are taught to rationally adhere to the law, and there's no way your stupid questionnaire could have influenced the outcome of our cogitations.
They were in denial of the denial of death.
There you go. And so my joke is, if you're going to have to be in court, you better pray that the judge doesn't drive by a cemetery on the way over, because things may not end well if that's the case. So anyway, that's the first study that we did. All right, but if you think about it for a moment, if you're reminded of death and it makes you more angry or punitive, that's interesting. But maybe not surprising. What would be more surprising is that if you're reminded of death and you actually respond more positively. So in another study, we reminded university students of death, and we asked them to set a reward for somebody who had behaved heroically in a little case where they helped stop a bank robbery. And what we found is that people reminded of death, they said that the person who behaved in a heroic fashion should get 3 times as much a reward. All right, and so this then led to other studies. So, for example, we had Christian participants, and we reminded them of death or something unpleasant, and then we asked them to rate other students who were very similar, except some were also said they came from Christian families, and some said that they came from Jewish families. And what we found was, again, very striking, because in the control condition, the Christian participants didn't differentiate between Christian and Jewish people. They rated them just as highly as they ought, because they were very similar. However, when they were reminded of death first, now they liked fellow Christians a whole lot more, and they hated Jewish people. And we think this is an important finding, because the first thing that we were interested in, Jeff and Tom and I, in our old days, is we wanted to figure out why people can't get along with other people who don't share their beliefs about the nature of reality. And to be silly for a minute, that question is, that's been since minute one. We've been kicking the crap out of other people who, salute different flags and worship different gods. And, that's not changed since the 1980s. If anything, the question is more pressing today. And what Ernest Becker said, and what terror management theory says, is that, well, if your beliefs serve to reduce death anxiety, then the mere existence of somebody who's different is threatening. Because if you accept the validity of somebody else's beliefs, well, you're basically undermining the confidence that you have in your own. And this risks exposing you to the very anxiety that your beliefs were constructed to minimize in the first place. And what Becker wrote, and what we believe to be true, is that helps us understand why whenever we bump into people who are new, the first thing we do is to condemn or belittle them, at the same time that we try to convince them to get rid of their own ideas and to adopt ours instead. And if that doesn't work, just kill those poor bastards, thus proving that our ideas are better after all. And, as chilling as it sounds, what Ernest Becker said in his last book called Escape from Evil is that most of the evil in the world is caused by people who self-righteously declare that they're going to rid the world of evil. And we have found this to be, unfortunately, very true. in our studies. And so consistently, when we remind people of death, it's not only Christians in Arizona. In Israel, if you remind Jewish people that they're going to die, they love fellow Jews, and they hate Arabs and Christians. In Australia, if you remind Aborigines that they're going to die, they love Aborigines, and they hate the European immigrants and so on. But it also affects behavior. When Germans are reminded of their mortality, they sit closer to people who look like they're German, and they sit further away from people who look like they're Turkish immigrants. When Iranians are reminded of their mortality, they become more supportive of suicide bombers and more willing to become a suicide bomber themselves. And in the United States, I joke that Americans are very practical. We're not about to blow ourselves up, but we're happy to blow up other people. So when we remind Americans that they will die, they become much more supportive of using biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons against countries who do not presently threaten us. And this is particularly true for Americans who report themselves as being politically conservative. And I can talk much more, if you'd like, about other things, but one line of research that I think is very, very interesting and important is just this idea that when death is on our minds, we love people who are like us, and we hate and we will hurt people who are different.
This whole death anxiety is we are clinging as a defense mechanism to our culture and whatever we value from our culture or our community.
That's right.
Right. So you said, and we will go against the other culture, which are different, but also we will value and cherish everything that this culture, the culture of ours, praise, like our culture right now is money, fame, fortune, all this kind of stuff, right? So you have other kind of experiments which are even more scary, I guess. Because
yes, they scare me, and I'm glad that you feel the same way. I mean, there's a play that we like a lot by an American playwright, Tennessee Williams, called Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And in our book, The Worm at the Core, we quote a line from the play where the main character says, the human animal is a beast that dies, and if he's got money, he buys and he buys and he buys. And I think one of the reasons he buys everything that he can buy is that in the back of his head, he's got the crazy idea that one of his purchases will be life everlasting. And so sure enough, we and other researchers have done studies that show that when people are reminded of their mortality, and you ask them, well, how much money would you need to have to think that you're rich? They say that they would need more money. And when people are reminded of their mortality and you show them advertisements for fancy things like expensive cars and jewelry, they say that they want more things. And the other studies by some very talented Polish psychologists showed that when people are reminded of their mortality, and you just ask them to draw a picture of money, like, well, show me what money looks like. They draw coins and paper money, and they draw bigger pictures, as if when death is on your mind, money gets bigger. And they did another study that I find just really astonishing, where they gave some people a stack of money, and they just asked them to count it. And then they gave other people a stack of pieces of paper, and they asked them to count that. And nobody got to keep the money. They're like, hey, count some money, and now give it back to me. And then they measured death anxiety. And the people who counted the money had lower death anxiety. And I think this work is, again, not because we had anything to do with it. In fact, we didn't do most of these studies. But Ernest Becker argues, and other people do too, that money and our desire for infinite amounts of it is really a not very healthy effort to deny death. Anything in nature is ultimately finite, and our desires for it can be satisfied. So, if you like apples, I don't care how much you like apples. If I put you in an apple orchard, there'll come a point where you're like, fuck, I've had enough apples. Or, if you like beer, I love beer. But there'll come a point where you're like, wait a minute, no quiero más cerveza. I've had enough.
Well, Sheldon,
yeah.
Kiev is an island, and I've been living in Ireland for 6 years. I will debate that. I will really
Okay, maybe people...
There are times when people don't know they've had enough. So
I would agree.
Maybe the desire is... and if it was possible, that they possibly would keep drinking. Yeah,
myself too. So maybe that's not a good one. But Locke's point was, anything natural, there's an upper limit to how much you want. But with money, there's no upper limit. People have never said, most people have never said, well, I have enough. And what Becker argues is that anytime we have an insatiable desire, we should wonder whether or not what's lurking behind it is the urge to deny our death. There's other studies that people have done that show when we're reminded that we're going to die, we really resent the fact that we're animals, and it makes us uncomfortable with our bodies. It makes us uncomfortable in natural surroundings, and it makes us much more willing to greedily exploit non-renewable natural resources for our own personal gain. And so to get back to where we started out, I think another interesting area that has been pursued in the context of terror management theory is just how death anxiety turns us into basically people who do nothing for the most part except go shopping or maybe drinking. At the end of the denial of death, Ernest Becker said most people on any given day are either shopping or drinking, which is pretty much the same thing. And sure enough, other folks have done studies that when they remind people of death, they eat more cookies, they drink more alcohol, and if they smoke cigarettes, they smoke more cigarettes.
When we started this project with Keith and we just realized that there was the terror management theory, we said, oh my God, it means that we are just triggering everyone, by just, telling death things, But it's something different because in all your experiments, it's these death reminders are going into the unconscious level somehow.
That's correct. And this is incredibly important, and you said it better than I. Our experiments are very short reminders of death. You're walking in front of a funeral parlor. You fill out a little questionnaire. We flash the word death so fast that nobody can see it. Well, that's when the effects are problematic. I mean, the way we write about it in our book, we're like, it's not death anxiety that is the problem. It's when we bury it under the psychological bushes, to use a silly metaphor, and then it comes back to bear poisonous fruits. But if these ideas have merit, then the fact that you all are taking the time to explore them, and in your podcasts, and I was watching a few of them to get ready for today, they're just wonderful. You're not replicating our experiments by doing something very subtle, and if you did, everybody would go out and vote for Donald Trump a couple of minutes later. What you're doing? Yeah, well, we need to talk about this in a minute.
Man,
let's talk about this.
If you tell me that we
No, this is important. All right, but the good news, what you all are doing, I believe, is literally, without sounding silly, one of the most important contributions to the potential future of humankind, because a guy named Robert J. Lifton, who we write about in our book, in a book called Destroying the World to Save It, he's like, if we don't get this idea in wider circulation that unconscious death anxiety brings out the worst in us, then we're in trouble. We could be the first form of life to be responsible for our extinction.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, please support the show by signing up at depthhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.